A P-47 by the name of R. Mary roars downward in a low-level strike on German tanks that are attempting to attack American troops, when suddenly she and her pilot find themselves in the middle of an ambush. In the moments that follow, Lieutenant Ed Cottrell would take a direct hit, and as he nursed his stricken Thunderbolt home, something incredible happened, as not one, but two German fighters arrive, with a clear opportunity to kill. But instead of that, what can only be considered an unbelievable act of mercy in the midst of an all-out war. Today, we dive into the archives, hear the story from the man who flew it, and relive the mission. It is December of 1944. And currently, the German army is beginning what would be their final offensive, a maximum effort attack, punching through the Ardennes to try and break the American lines in Belgium. To stop this counteroffensive, the Allied forces in Belgium are preparing to dig in and defend. But with the numbers that the Germans are utilizing and the strength of their armored divisions, the battered American infantry and airborne units have to have support. The only ones in the right position to answer this call are the pilots of the 9th Air Force, and specifically the 493rd Fighter Squadron of the 48th Fighter Group, also known as the Grim Reapers. The Grim Reapers had already, to this point, shown that they were skilled low-level flyers, bombing and strafing German targets all across the Rhine in support of the advancing American Ninth Army. This was an extremely risky endeavor, with German flak being by far their most lethal adversary. But as the missions went along, while most of the pilots accepted these risks and the potential consequences of combat, not everyone could handle the stress. On December 17th of 1944, the Grim Reapers would be called in for a low-level dive-bombing mission to repel the German advance. And on this morning, one of Ed's squadron mates simply wasn't all right.
There were 7 of us lived in a room, and we were really close. We played poker among our group. When you ran out of money, you didn't borrow money because you didn't know whether you were going to be alive the next day or not. But our roommates, we all came to the 48th Fighter Group at the same time. Art Summers was a football player at USC, and I can tell you that Art Summers had difficulty going on a mission. I can remember them having to lift and put him in the plane. He didn't want to get into the cockpit. And I can remember the squadron commander told him that he was going to be grounded and because he wasn't in shape to fly anymore. And I think that's why they had to put him into the plane that day that we took off. He was, I don't know, he just couldn't handle the combat again. I guess got to him. I have no idea, but I do know that he had trouble getting into the cockpit.
In addition to Art Summers, Ed Cottrell would be flying on the wing of Lieutenant Jim Watson, one of the seasoned flyers of the 48th Fighter Group. They would be flying the 3 and 4 planes in Red Flight, led by squadron leader Stanley Latiolas. Soon enough, the boys were up, and they took off for what would become one of the most memorable missions of the war. The following is taken from the 48th Fighter Group's diary for this mission.
The 493rd Squadron, led by Major Stanley P. Latiolas, dispatched 12 aircraft on a mission to perform a bridge busting and armed recon on an enemy bridge. 4 aircraft carried 500-pound bombs on 8 to 11-second delay, and 4 aircraft carried general-purpose bombs, and 4 aircraft flew top cover.
In this attack, Ed Cottrell was assigned to the lower group, with bombs armed to strike ground targets rather than the bridge. The Grim Reapers came across the Belgian countryside in tight formation according to the assigned groups. Eventually, they located the bridge, and the first 4 P-47s released their bombs, just missing a hit on the target, but successfully cutting some of the railroad tracks nearby. The other 4-plane flight then moved to find a ground target for their bombs. This was the flight of Ed Cottrell and Jim Watson. Shortly thereafter, they spotted the target that they were looking for, a row of German tanks leading a convoy nearby. And this is where the battle would begin.
And so we're on a mission, and again, I flew wing to our squadron commander, and we spot Tiger tanks in the wood. And so we circled, made the pass. My squadron commander went down first. I went down second. He pulled up, I pulled up, and we're maybe 3,000 feet going up, straight up. And I noticed an ME-109 at 1 o'clock, which would be to my right side. And I called him, and I told him that the 109 was firing, and he said, "Yeah, I know."
As we can see from the report, this attack came just as Ed was beginning his run on the tanks, and was a very large ambush from German Messerschmitts, totaling more than 20 aircraft. First, a few of the 109s ambushed the top cover flight, and then the rest of the force came in to attack Cottrell and the lower force just a few seconds later. For Ed Cottrell, this attack would come at the worst possible moment, right as he was pulling up from an attacking run. This gave him nowhere to fly and very little speed to maneuver away. Immediately, one of these German pilots, which were 109s from Skilled Fighter Squadron JG-27, would land a direct hit to our Mary. The jolt occurred, and Ed could immediately feel the impact beneath him.
And I could see that 20 millimeter blinking. Then all of a sudden I heard pop, and there was black oil all over my windshield. And I looked, and I saw the 20 millimeter cannon from the 109, and just as he was going over me, I tried to turn, and I'm not sure if I fired or if I didn't fire. I just know that I got hit.
Unfortunately though, Ed Cottrell was not the only one who found himself in the crosshairs of a Luftwaffe aircraft. Nearby our Mary was Ed's leader, Lieutenant Jim Watson. As the dogfight broke out, Cottrell was following him closely, and tragically, this would be one of the last times that Jim Watson was ever seen.
I, Edwin B. Cottrell, second lieutenant, was flying fix-up Red 4 and was wingman to Lieutenant Watson, who was flying fix-up Red 3. We were attacked by approximately 20 ME-109s, and immediately our flight headed by Major Latiola turned into them. An ME-109 came at Lieutenant Watson and I from about 2 o'clock high, and we pulled our planes up and turned into him. However, he scored a hit on my plane, which caused my engine to fail and my plane to lose altitude. Lieutenant Watson's plane was still flying and was apparently not hit by the ME-109 as he turned to rejoin Major Latiola, who was pursuing another ME-109.
In the seconds after receiving what was likely a 20 millimeter cannon impact, Ed knew that things were not well. Our Mary was obviously losing power, and now hot oil began to cover his entire plane, making visibility next to zero.
Well, the first thing when I heard this pop, and I had no idea, I knew it hit the plane. And then all of a sudden there's black oil, and it's hot, it's steaming, and the windshield is completely covered. And the only way I could see was to throw the canopy back, and it's cold. it's windy. And I had no idea, except that the engine was just barely functioning, and I knew that I'd been hit, and I knew that I was either going to get hit again or I was going to have to bail out.
After this hit, Ed had his own problems to worry about, and because of this, in the moments that followed, contact and visual was lost with First Lieutenant Jim Watson.
I tried to establish radio contact with Lieutenant Watson and tell him I was forced to leave the formation, but had no results as his radio was apparently out. As I recovered my plane from the dive, the engine caught and I came home on the deck. I last sighted Lieutenant Watson trying to rejoin Major Latiola and his wingman, Lieutenant White. Signed, Second Lieutenant Edwin B. Cottrell.
Tragically, Ed could not focus on this for long, and wouldn't know many of the details until much later. For now, he simply had to keep his own plane in the air.
I threw open the canopy, and the plane sort of died. And I thought, well, I don't know what I'm either going to jump out or bail out or what. And all of a sudden, the engine started chugging along. So I called my squadron commander and told him I was hit. And he said, well, take it as far as you can, head 270. And that was the standard. If you got hit, you always headed west 270 degrees.
He began limping home in an oily black Thunderbolt at just enough speed to keep the aircraft in the air. Ed was now too low to bail out and had only minimal control or maneuverability due to the state of his aircraft. Here he was a sitting duck, praying to make the long and lonely flight back to friendly lines. And it was in this moment that the worst possible scenario began to materialize right in front of his eyes.
So I started flying. I was maybe 1,000 to 1,000 feet above ground, chugging along at 130 mile an hour, and stalling speed's 120. And I'm just above stalling speed. And I look out to my right, and there's an ME-109. And I look to the left, and there's an ME-109. And they crisscross behind me, and I'm waiting for the shells, the bullets to start. And no bullets. And I look, and the one ME-109 had throttled back, and he came in right next to my wing. And I looked the other side, the other one had come in. They were flying formation, and I could look and see them, and they were too young. Each of them were young kids, young pilot, and they flew me escort until we got to the bomb line. We got near the bomb line. They circled their first finger and thumb and peeled off and went back to Germany.
In one of the most unbelievable acts of mercy ever told, 2 ME-109s approach the stricken Thunderbolt and proceed to fly with him, in formation, clearly recognizing that he was crippled and incapable of fighting. After signaling to Ed Cottrell, the 2 German pilots peel off and head for home, leaving our Mary and her stunned pilot in friendly territory.
I got on the radio, and somebody came on over the radio and said, what's your airfield? And I said, A92. And they said, well, you're not far, make a 90-degree right, and you should get to it very shortly. And just as I'm getting ready to, I'm coming into land about maybe right above the edge of the runway, the engine froze over, quit. So I had to dead stick the plane in, and I landed it, and they came out and towed the plane back. I found out later that it had lost 8 cylinders out of the 18, and that engine still ran. Now that's a miracle. 8 cylinders out of 18. And I've since told Pratt & Whitney how thankful I were they made such a good engine, because I was alive thanks to that engine keeping going.
As Ed landed his plane and climbed out of the battered bird, he stepped down and kissed the ground, realizing that he was lucky to be alive. And now, after sitting down and taking in the series of events that had just happened, he finally had time to reflect on the men who had just spared his life.
Why the two Germans didn't shoot me down, I have no idea. And people ask me, would I have done what they did? And I said, probably I would, because I can remember from playing on all the sports that I played, you never took advantage of a cripple. You know, if a guy's hurt, you didn't take advantage of him. I can remember playing football, a guy got hurt, you didn't go try to hurt him again. You know, he's hurt, get him out of there. And I would never have tried to take advantage of a German pilot that was in trouble. I would have tried to help him. And I think that's what those two pilots, I don't know. I would love to meet them. I never will, but I would love to meet them and thank them.
But unfortunately, perhaps most tragic of all, when Ed tried to share the story of the two German pilots that safely watched over him on the dangerous flight home, it was considered to be a tall tale.
They didn't believe me. They didn't believe me. And I had no verification. I had nobody to verify that the two German 109s, and they said that they wouldn't do it, and I said, well. And because there was no verification, I was put in for a DSC, but I never got it because there was no verification that what had happened.
And in some ways, this sentiment from the 493rd was understandable, as the Luftwaffe had never been so hated in the unit as they were at this very moment. As Ed would soon find out, it was their most costly day of the war. Not only had his leader, Lieutenant Jim Watson, been lost and killed when his aircraft was shot down by a German fighter, but also lost was Lieutenant Arthur Summer, the poor young man who had to be helped into his aircraft before the mission. The following is the recollection of Lieutenant Lloyd White, read to in Ed's flight.
I, Lloyd White, First Lieutenant, on December 17, 1944, at approximately 1115 hours, was flying Red 2 on mission when we engaged about 20 Me-109s. During the ensuing flight, I observed a white parachute open almost in my flight path. I passed very close to it immediately after it opened and noted that the man was still alive and was wearing a green flying suit. Realizing from radio chatter that Lieutenant Summer had been shot down, I surmised that it was he I had seen. However, I was not close enough to him or to the airplane he bailed out of to be positive. This occurred in the vicinity of coordinate F-2018. Signed, First Lieutenant Lloyd White.
After gathering information from various sources after the war, it became clear that Lieutenant Summer was likely shot down, possibly by JG-27 fighter ace Walter Arnold, who claimed a P-47 kill in this same area during this engagement. Sadly, however, Summer would bail out successfully and survive, only to be likely killed by the SS just a few days later. Following this brutal mission and the loss of two of their pilots, the 493rd would be forced to grieve quickly. For in the coming days, they would be called upon for their most important mission of the war, the support for the Battle of the Bulge and the 101st Airborne at Bastogne. All of this will be coming in part 3 of Ed's story, coming soon to TJ3 History. If you enjoyed this, please consider joining my Patreon so I can keep telling the stories of veterans. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.